Considering Charlotte is a series that I'm doing with a number of United Methodist pastors aiming to shed light on the upcoming General Conference for the United Methodist Church. I'm Jeffrey Rickman. I'm Global Methodist clergy, but I feel strongly about having truth shared in the open and having democratic processes take place. For that reason, have many different people a part of this series, two of whom are not represented today, but the three gentlemen that I'm happy to be visiting with today are Simon Mufunda of the East Zimbabwe Annual Conference, Lonnie Brooks of the Alaska Conference, and then Odell Horn of the North Georgia Annual Conference. And all three of them, we have a long series of episodes that we've done that are topically oriented before this point. There are other topics we could cover, but it seems to me at least, and probably to these guys as well, that we would do well at this point to kind of leave this format that we have had and instead spend the next few weeks, because General Conference is right around the corner. Things are developing quickly. There are a lot of shifting sands, and it might be wise for us now just to speak about the different developments that are happening, what we're seeing, and what we think that our audience should be praying about. So that's what this format is going to be today. And before I turn to each of these guys, I'm going to urge you, the audience, to make sure if you have questions or concerns, things that you think we should be speaking to, then I would have you write us an email at plainspokenpod@gmail.com, or you can comment on wherever you're viewing this. And if you do that, then we will follow up over the coming weeks to let you know our thoughts. So at this point, I want to defer to Lonnie. Lonnie, you stay apprised of these things probably better than most. What developments have you seen over the last couple of weeks that everybody should be aware about?
Well, the one that has my attention right now more than any other is that we just this week received a completely new version of Volume 3 of the advanced edition of the Daily Christian Advocate, which was a total surprise. I didn't expect that at all. I knew there was some material that we were missing in the first version of Volume 3. And mind you, Volume 3 is the supplement that was necessary for several reasons, not the least of which is that we had a whole lot of petitions that were submitted after the first couple of volumes of the ADCA had been released. So that was appropriate, that and in fact essential, that we have a third volume. But we didn't, at least I didn't expect that we would have a new version of that, which makes some of the work that we've done, that I in particular had done this matrix of petitions, and that'll have to be reworked now with this new edition because the page numbers are all different. So that was a surprise. And there have been some emphases placed on some of the work that is before the General Conference by several interest groups that have been getting quite a bit of attention and around the church press and perhaps even some outside the church. And I'm thinking in particular from mainstream UMC, which has been very vocal about emphasizing three different things that they think are the most important things that General Conference must deal with: regionalizing the church, revising the social principles, and help me, what's the third one they're emphasizing? Regionalize, revise.
Removing the biased language or something.
Yeah. Yes, removing what is thought by many of us as the harmful language relative to the LGBTQ plus community. So these are certainly high-profile issues now, at least in part because of the emphasis that's coming from mainstream UMC.
Let's. I want to check in with Odell and then Simon about basic developments that they're seeing, and then as I heard Lonnie, there were two different topics. One being the release of a new ADCA, but then also the heightening of the rhetoric among not just mainstream UMC, but there was also an incendiary piece sent out by WCA. So let's circle back to those. But Odell, what else have you seen over the last weeks that would be worthy of mention?
Yeah, the GCFNA has done at least one. GCFNA did one new webinar talking about the budget reducing 43% and going into details about that budget. And that was released last week or earlier this week. And then the other one is Westpath did a Q&A, and Westpath went through, answered some questions from delegates to General Conference, and a lot of them had to do with investments in sustainability. And so that's what I'm looking at towards heading into this General Conference. In addition to what Lonnie said, Lonnie's absolutely right. The 3 R's, as they are called: regionalization, removing the harmful language, and I just forgot the third one. But that's what I'm looking to provide. Thank you.
So we've covered the budget. That was our last episode that we did, this 43% reduction. But then Westpath, that piece. So there's GCFA, which is the general church budget, but Westpath is the one that manages all of the endowment funds for all of the foundations, as well as all of the retirement funds for clergy and other church employees. So they manage hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. And so questions of sustainability, in particular the environmentalist cause, which is largely synonymous with the Democratic Party, but also a lot of Republicans are concerned about it as well. But then also, it was my understanding that the boycott, divest, sanction movement against the state of Israel was also quite vocal in that conversation. And you're nodding your head. So Odell was, maybe that we can come back around to that as well. But we haven't talked in particular about the BDS movement, but I've said privately in my own commentary that BDS is largely associated with far left progressive politics in America. And so it looks like there's going to be a concerted play to align United Methodist dollars with far left progressive politics, which I don't think would surprise anybody to hear who's in the know, but maybe some people who don't watch this stuff as closely might do well to pay attention. So we'll circle back around to that as well. And then Simon, what we'll do with you is ask generally what you've seen, but then I know one thing in particular that everybody wants to hear about is how African delegations are doing actually getting through the visa process and getting to America. So give us a broad picture of what you're seeing, and then go ahead and get into the particulars of what's happening on the ground in different African nations.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Just adding to the developments in terms of what to expect, I think the rhetoric or the voices on disaffiliation issues, I think you've gone quite, the bar has gone up. Many voices are speaking for disaffiliation and the fairness and justice issues concerning disaffiliation related to like the just expired 2553. And I think the last couple of weeks we had some very powerful voices that people were forced to listen to. I think one of them was Forbes Matonga from Zimbabwe. He did some very strong article on those issues. So I think some of the quarters are starting to take us seriously about the disaffiliation issue. And it's something that needs to be considered seriously at the conference, at the General Conference. I know the other side, they've been trying to drown it by this regionalization rhetoric. But I think those voices are coming up and they cannot be ignored anymore. And so besides that, let me talk about some kind of updates of other developments in Africa that I believe will leave, if they are not sorted out, which also seems to be a bit late now, but they are being ignored, will really bring into question the credibility of the General Conference session. We have been talking about the late invitation letters and what that meant to international delegates. Fair and fine, eventually the invitation letters came, but too late, so much that those delegates who were denied visas, we could not then send their alternates to try and take a chance to get a visa. And you may have heard about the chaos in Nigeria. Nigerians had to travel all the way to Liberia to try and get visas. And I think the two batches that have gone there, they have all been denied visas in a very dramatic and suspicious manner. And at the end of the day, if we get 30% of the Nigerians getting visas to General Conference, will be lucky, which means out of the 22 delegates, we're likely to get probably just 8 or below 8, which means the supermajority are not gonna be able to travel to Charlotte for this General Conference. And that has happened to other conferences as well, where heads of delegations or whoever, authorities had requested for invitation letters for alternate delegates so that they take the place of the principal delegates who had been denied visas. Those letters took forever to come. And when they eventually came, which was about 2-3 weeks ago, it's all too late now for those guys to apply for an appointment for a visa. They have to wait for about 3 months. So it's really a mess. And I did a rough survey, and as of last week, my number of denied visas was on 52. And that's quite big, comparing to the average of 10% of the African delegates, in the past. We are now sitting on 52 out of the 278 delegates. And as we speak, we still have about 30 odd delegates from South Congo and Zambia who are still to attend their interviews between now and around about the 15th of April. And obviously, out of the 35 odd, we are likely to have more rejections or denials there. And for North Katanga, I also understand that they still have quite a number of delegates who are still to attend their visa interviews. And the chances are that a few more are going to be denied. So at the end of the day, the number is likely to go up probably to the 70s, or at least something above 60 delegates from Africa alone that may not attend this General Conference because of the poor preparations that we experienced. Because if we had received invitation letters well in time, at least it was going to give us a chance for more delegates to apply, one after the other, following the order of their election, and maximize on the number of delegates that could get visas. So the big question is, if we have, say, more than 25 or 30% of African delegates failing to attend, how do we handle that? Do we still see this as a credible General Conference? And do we just proceed with business as usual with more than 70 or so delegates from Africa failing to attend? I see that as a challenge. And we have other issues with other smaller conferences where there are some complications, filtering to us. And hopefully by mid-April, we'll be able to do a full assessment of how many delegates are not able to attend General Conference, especially because of visa-related issues and other issues where delegates had been replaced unprocedurally. And, we have had 1 or 2 cases like that we're trying to verify. So I think by about mid-April, we'll be able to give a final number, at least a more realistic number of the total of delegates. But so far, the 52 is confirmed that those have already failed to get visas to the General Conference. So that is the general picture from Africa. And we really feel shortchanged in many ways. One of our leaders, Jerry Kula, on behalf of the Africa Initiative, wrote to the General Conference business manager and their teams there to also raise our concerns about what we're going to face when we get to Charlotte in terms of our arrival time and the time we are expected to begin doing serious business. There's not enough time to do adjustments, to You remember, we are like 6-7 hours different in terms of our times, and having traveled for more than 20, 22, 24 hours on the plane, it's a serious issue that we really needed to be sensitive about and allow people some time to rest before they engage into serious business. They have not responded to us. There is an issue of the boxed meals. We don't even know what's in those boxes. And adjustment to diet is a serious issue. I remember in Oregon, 2 of our members, I think from Mozambique, they spent the whole time of the general conference in hospital because of food issues. They got sick. So we really thought they would take those issues seriously and respond and explain how they are going to handle those things. But our delegates are still worried. They were never responded to. And we just go there and get all the surprises. And I think it will impact negatively on our full participation in the general conference business. So
I
those
just
are
want to
some of
make
the
sure I heard
developments
you
that we
right,
are concerned.
Simon. I think I just heard you say that Jerry Kula, on behalf of several dozens at least of delegates from Africa, submitted an official request to the business administrator of the General Conference. I publicly reported on this and read the text of that letter. And did I just hear you say that almost a month after submitting that, they still have not responded at all?
They have not responded. We have not had any response, unless I missed it. But obviously, if they had responded to Jerry Kula, he would have also shared with us, because we had input in those concerns. He was doing it on our behalf. So if they had responded, obviously he would have shared that response with us. So as far as I understand, there hasn't been any response from the General Conference business officials.
Well, let's zoom out for a minute, because another thing that I reported on was from mainstream United Methodist. Mark Holland put out a thing probably a month and a half ago saying that the General Conference administration was not responsive to him and his people either, and that they had not been granted access to an online portal for their different resources, that basic arrangements for hotels had not been made, and and then he also decried that entire African delegations had not received invitation letters yet. So something that I think we need to revisit is, Simon, to your knowledge, at this point at least, have all the African delegates received invitation letters, or are there still people who have not even been invited yet?
Invitation letters have eventually come. We've got a few special cases where maybe replacements were done and they were not done properly, and the bona fide delegates have not received invitation letters because of internal issues this side. So that's slightly different, but eventually the invitation letters came, but of course too late. And invitation letters for alternate delegates to replace those who had been denied also eventually came, but too late. You won't even use them. You just pick them up and throw them in the dustbin, because it's all too late now to apply for the visas.
I told you guys before I turned on the cameras that I've been following along with, I've been invited into the WhatsApp conversations of some delegations, and I was made aware at one point that delegations had been given the impression by General Conference staff that these dramatic efforts to go and get interviews in other countries and stuff, that they would be funded by the general church, and that hasn't happened, that instead they've had to do this on their own dime, to pay it with their own money and then hopefully get reimbursed by the general church. Have I understood correctly that this has been a huge financial burden for those who are trying to represent their areas to the General Conference?
I can give you an example of Nigeria, because I'm quite updated on Nigeria.
Okay.
On Nigeria, General Conference offered to pay the flights and the hotel expenses for the delegates to go to Monrovia, Liberia. And they indeed did that. They organized the tickets and everything like that. But the problem is it all came like too late, because when you book an appointment in Liberia, you then had to communicate quickly to the General Conference officials that this is the date that I've got. And, we wanted days as close as possible so that at least you have enough time to then go there and then apply for submit the visa for the tickets. So when the dates were given, they communicated to Sarah or whoever is in charge at General Conference for them to prepare the tickets. And the time lag was too short, and we have got a case whereby 2 delegates missed their flights because the tickets came like today and they have to fly out tomorrow from some rural area somewhere. They've got to do a local flight to Abuja, then fly out of Abuja to Liberia. And they were not financing the local transportation from wherever they are flying from or driving from to the port of departure. They were only financing the ticket from the port of departure to Liberia. So that created confusion, and that time lag, which was very tight. So I think 2 or 3 delegates missed their flights, and they could not reschedule because the next days were away after General Conference. So we have lost those 3 delegates because of that tight program of getting the tickets from GC and all that. But at least they committed to pay, and they paid. But there was that challenge now of managing the time, and they did not pay for the local costs of transporting the delegates from wherever they are to the port of departure. That's one that I can confirm. But other areas, I did not get an update as of now.
So one of the clear concerns suggested by all of these things is something that you've already said explicitly, Simon, is can this next general conference be considered a legitimate gathering if between 25 and 35, maybe up to 40% of the African delegation does not eventually make it to America? And you haven't given those numbers. That's just my thinking of here are all the different logistical, economic complications. How realistic is it to expect a sizable portion of the African delegation to be there? I hope I'm wrong. I hope it's only 10% like usual that doesn't make it. But in the case that a big group isn't able to be there, then they might have the whole gathering, but any decisions they reached will have such a stink on it that it's not received by the general denomination. Lonnie, it seems to me that a lot of this could have been avoided had the general conference staff moved more quickly and gotten out these invitation letters 6 months ago and gotten all the stuff processed for general conference delegations, gotten out this 3rd edition of the ADCA several months earlier. It seems to me that they're doing all of this last minute, and I have not been made aware of any legitimate reasons as to why it is they are doing all this last minute. It seems to me and many others that they got an entire quadrennium to make these preparations, and that they've done this before, so they should know how to do it. It seemed very strange to me that all of these different complications have come up and everything's getting done last minute. Lonnie, you're better in the loop than I am, and I'm wondering if you have heard any legitimate explanations as to why it is that the General Conference staff seems to be struggling so mightily to do their jobs.
Well, we really don't have a satisfactory explanation. There have been some explanatory kinds of statements that have been made, but they didn't explain very much as far as I was concerned. It had to do with identification of the persons who were elected, and there was even some questions about the validity of some of the elections. None of it made very much sense to me, and I don't think it clarified the situation. And mind you, the last postponement came in 22, and so it was a 2-year lead. So there was, it seems to be, from an objective point of view, and I'm not sure how many people would think of me as objective in this, but in any case, from what seems to be an objective point of view, 2 years would be a long enough time to get these problems sorted out and the letters of invitation issued and visa applications made, and it didn't happen. And so, yeah, there's some real frustration, not just on the part of the folks who are directly affected in Africa, but on those of us who have been observing this, and knowing that the very credibility, as Simon has so well said, of the pronouncements and the actions of the General Conference is concerned, not just within the church, but within the whole religious community and even beyond. The whole reputation and effectiveness of the United Methodist Church is at stake here. To put the numbers in a little bit of perspective here, that if we're talking about 60 or more of our African delegates, and I think it's going to be more, who will not be able to attend because of these visa problems, we're talking about a body of the church, of the General Conference, that is larger than the whole delegation from the Philippines, for example, or from Europe. I think that rightfully the credibility of the General Conference itself would be at stake. And in fact, I would say that the only reasonable response that we could make to that situation, if that's what develops, that we're short because of visa problems and difficulties, somewhere around 25% or more, and it might even be a number lower than that. 60 sounds like to me an awful lot of delegates not to be there. Then the only proper thing that we could do, because nobody would trust what the General Conference said in that kind of situation, would be to do the bare essential things that we need to do to prepare the way for a future General Conference to be convened and have some credibility, would be, say, to adopt a provision which we desperately need that would allow the General Conference to meet in part or in whole electronically in the future, which we can't do now because there's no provision for that. So adopt something like that, elect a new judicial council. We desperately need that. And there may be one or two other things that we would have to do, and then adjourn it, go home. Because if we tried to do anything of substance, nobody would put any faith in it.
That sounds real. The part of me that's fiscally minded just cringes at the notion of millions and millions of dollars being spent to do the bare minimum, and there's still going to be a stink over it. But it seems like no amount of money can properly solve the conundrum that is now before the United Methodist Church. So that's upsetting. I think I want to have Odell comment on kind of the latest developments and the drama between different constituency groups. And looking from the outside, what I've seen is representing the left progressive cause. I know they say that they're centrist, but it seems to me that mainstream UMC really is quite far left. We've already talked about them summing up their position with the 3 R's, which are essentially the pretty far left position with respect to sexual morality in particular, but also isolating the American voice from the international voices. That's what I've understood regionalization to be. I know not everybody would agree with that, but there are 2 different developments over the last couple weeks that I want to hear, Odell, your thoughts on in particular. One is there's been a lot of pressure from the institution to kind of push WCA, Good News, out of the conversation. Hey, you guys have already said you support this new denomination. Y'all go be with them. Stop messing with us. Stop commenting. Stop influencing our delegates. Just leave. And then Rob Renfro wrote a piece saying, for right now, we need to advocate for people who are being intentionally left out of the conversation. We are going to advocate for churches that are trapped and left behind. We're going to advocate for international churches, non-American churches that have not been given the ability to disaffiliate. And once that situation is remedied, then yeah, we're going to stop messing with you. That's me putting it in my own language. That is not a direct quote. That was answered by a member of the Standing Committee on Central Conference Matters. I forget the lady's name, but she said, we already have provision for non-American annual conferences to leave and disaffiliate. It's in the Book of Discipline. Look it up. You're manufacturing a need that is not there.
Christine Schneider.
That's Christine Schneider.
Thank you for that name, and I'm not familiar with her. And
Swiss.
I'll give Lonnie and Simon a chance to answer that particular allegation since
Odell.
you're very well read on it. But the second development, Odell, has been this exchange. Well, essentially, it was Ed Rodarmel, who's tied to the WCA. He put together a 2-minute video highlighting the commonality between American segregation and the regionalization plan. The fundamental issue being, are we going to share in a common polity or not? And the regionalization proposal seems to advocate that in a number of ways. Well, and Mark Holland has been very clear about this. Americans kick in the vast majority of international money. There is no way we're going to let an African majority decide what to do with the money that we have put in. And to people like me, that smacks of overt racism. Like, I mean, at that point, I just go, that's nuts. If you're going to say that out loud, like that's a rational thing to say, especially as a Christian. I just think that's so asinine. But he says it with a straight face. Ed Rodarmel puts together this piece that clearly connects the ethos of that regionalization agenda with American apartheid. And then not only does Mark Holland respond, but he does it hysterically. They're calling us racist, as though it's a foregone conclusion. There's no way we could be racist. And so it just seems so crazy and tone deaf to me. I'm just going, yeah, you look and sound like a racist. If it walks like a duck, if it talks like a duck, it's a duck. I know, Odell, that you have thoughts on these things, so I just kind of wanted to let you go in whatever direction you wanted to with all this, and see if you can do so without sounding like a, well, who knows? You sound however you want. I'm not in control. Go ahead.
It is amazing how the Lord had my computer update prior to this conversation, and I have low network bandwidth popping up on my screen. So maybe that's a sign from the Lord that I need to listen, but I got a lot to say. I have a forthcoming article called Separate But Equal, in describing the regionalization plans. I'm really I'm just trying to process what Simon said. I'm going to get to your question, but I'm actually going to circle. I'm going to put your question on the shelf for a second. I'm stunned that we still are at this particular point where on November 4th, 2022, it was announced that Charlotte would be the location for the 2024 General Conference. That is the date that the jurisdictional conferences adjourned. So we've had almost a year and a half to get the visas, get the invitation letters, or the invitation letters first, then the visas, the interviews, the visas for African delegates to come to Charlotte. And here it is, April 5th. We meet on April 22nd. So in 17 days, we still have folks doing interviews to get visas, if I heard Simon correct. I will play the race card, but I'm not going to do that right now. I'm going to state that that's a problem, and that the silence from the Council of Bishops is deafening.
Amen.
I applaud Mark Holland for at least stepping up and saying something. However, no one else that I'm aware of, and I've been watching the Love Your Neighbor Coalition, has even spoken on this topic. I will be going back to the Black Methodist for Church Renewal with the updated report on what Simon has told me, and we'll check our sources and see if what Simon is telling us is correct. We'll see. But anyway, to your question, I am concerned that I got the back and forth between Mark Holland and Rob Renfro and Christine Schneider is her name?
Schneider's.
Yeah, correct.
And so that was a good, healthy conversation. But it is a matter of the regionalization is just if we pass regionalization and 60%, or excuse me, 60 delegates from the African Central Conferences are not present, then as they say in engineering, your system is designed to get the results that it's getting. And if 60 African Central Conference delegates do not show up, then the system is racist.
Thank you.
Okay, well, that was a good pregnant pause. That achieves its effect of communicating. You know, that silence is deafening as well. Let's figure out the particulars a little bit more of the different dramatic episodes that I highlighted, because I think that drama. I think there's equal light and heat there. I don't think they are without substance. The particular argument made by Ms. Schneider seemed disingenuous to me, because I was familiar with the disciplinary paragraph that she cited, and it only provides for conferences. There are two significant differences that I see. One is they can only disaffiliate as an entire conference rather than as individual churches. But two, it's not presented with the language of having a right to disaffiliate. Rather, it's a situation. It's a very not transparent process that is completely designed and overseen by the institution, as a series of hoops that a non-American entity would need to jump through and still get by only on the mercy of the institution. That seems a very different thing than the limited right. It's a rights language for individual churches that was allowed by 2553 to disaffiliate. I know that Mark Holland in a recent statement said that they're not against disaffiliation. They're just against a church-wide policy on disaffiliation. They think it should be up to annual conferences. That also seems disingenuous to me, because then, I mean, what we saw in the imposition of 2553 is if you had a hostile annual conference that just said, we're not going to do it, then there was no recourse. And so it seems to me that Holland has that in mind, where there are just going to be different annual conferences that say, no, we're not going to play ball with local churches. And then the response is just going to be a shrug. You know, well, we gave them the right and they're not using it. So next question, please. So with all those thoughts from me, let's go to Lonnie. Do you think how much of what I said sounds ideologically tinged too bad, and what needs correction? And then what texture would you add?
I think you're pretty much right on, Jeffrey. There was a substantive problem with, in my judgment, with Ms. Schneider's argument, but I took fault with her mainly over procedural thing here. She chose as her opponent for the argument Rob Renfro, and from a certain perspective, he was an easy target, and she attacked him as not representative of the people for whom he was arguing, which is to say the Africans. Well, yeah, but there was Forbes and Matanga making exactly the same kinds of arguments that Rob Renfro was making before Renfro made the arguments. In fact, probably his arguments were based on Forbes's position. And Christine didn't take on Forbes at all, which I thought was bizarre.
Well, in the age of identity politics, you cannot have a white woman answering an African man's complaint. So the best that she can do is virtue signal and tell the white guy to sit down and shut up. That's how I make sense of it. That's I don't think there's any other way to see it, honestly. You know, it's if she were to respond to Forbes Matanga, they would just land very differently. And so, you know, she wisely discerned that would be stupid.
That's what I said. She took on the easy target. She didn't take on the real target.
Simon yeah, go ahead, brother.
Thank you, Jeffrey, and thank you, Odell and Lonnie. Yeah, I've already done an article in response to Christine's article, and I've submitted it to Tim Tanton. This is the second day now. I'm waiting for his response. I really felt that, Christine was really targeting Rob. It was like a personal attack. And the disingenuity which is there, it's clear that she's not, she's trying to compare two provisions that cannot be compared. Yeah. And to say that Central Conference already have this affiliation pathway, it cannot be compared to 2553, which is its limited rights that you don't find in 572. And 572 talks of conferences that want to become autonomous Methodists or affiliated Methodists. And it has a whole long, arduous process which takes even up to 6 years. It cannot be compared with 2553. It's not there. Then she also ignores the differences in context, from their side, the Eastern Europe side, their bishops and the conference, they've been willing to sit down and negotiate and even used some other pathways that may not be found in the Book of Discipline and allowed to negotiate for whatever they could do. Something that you will not find in Africa. It's not there. And this is what we are talking about. We cannot compare these two things. I would rather they hear it from the Africans. And Forbes Matonga did present powerfully on those issues, representing super majority of Africans. I don't know why she ignored that. So really, I am hoping that our team will consider my piece and publish it as another perspective from the Africans, at least from central conferences, but at least from the African side of the story. So really, what we are looking at are two different things, and we are still very strong about the issue of fairness and justice. And we are talking about the issues of conscience on the issue, on the actions or lack of action on the LGBTQ issue, which affects the whole connection. We have been talking about churches, the reconciling churches being dedicated in Kenya. That's not America, it's happening here in Africa, and it affects us. That's why we are raising these things strongly. So I really hope that team will take up that article and use it as another perspective from central conferences, but at least from the African side, where the super majority of the central conference membership comes from. We carry more than almost 6 million of the membership of the central conferences, and I think it would make sense to give us a listening ear and to take us seriously. Thank you for those insights.
Well, I'm going to pick on you now, Simon, because I know that a large concern, we talked about it before we started recording. Everybody is concerned about the extremeness of the rhetoric, the height of the temperature, how anxiety ridden all this is. And none of us wants to unnecessarily cause things to be even worse. The purpose of considering Charlotte is not to lob bombs and make things worse. Rather, all of our hope was that by shining light on this and talking about things rationally, that we can actually help turn down the temperature and help delegates make more informed decisions. But here, just in this conversation, I have said, if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, Mark Holland is a racist. I pretty much connected those dots. And that's the sort of thing that can really, and that's in response to public discourse that the WCA has facilitated, and Edward Armel's piece that directly connects regionalization with segregation in America. So WCA is an organization that you operate publicly on behalf of. You've been a guest on the WCA podcast very recently. You operate as a WCA official. They've just put out this piece of, somebody might say, propaganda aimed at heightening racial awareness and tension in the denomination. But I know that that's not your heart, to exacerbate and make things worse and turn up the temperature. So could you talk a little bit about how it is that you want to turn the temperature down and help everybody behave well, but why you think it is necessary to highlight what seems to be pretty clear racism? Just talk about that for a little bit so that people don't feel like you're a hypocrite or something. It would be very easy to characterize you in a way that I don't think that you see yourself. So help us see you in the WCA well.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. I hope I got what you are inquiring on.
Hmm.
I really feel that, yes, if you listen to most of my advocacy talks, we're trying to, have a toned down rhetoric, try and bring down people to be more humble and be more mature, even though it can be painful. But my outcry has been, let's not repeat 2019. Let's not have another St. Louis in Charlotte, so that at least we make decisions for the good of the bigger picture. That has been what we have been advocating for. And then that brings in the issues of justice and fairness. Because the moment you say rules for them and not for us, then we start to see, signs of racism in such things, especially when they are always pushed down on Africans. Then it makes us very uncomfortable. This is why we are saying, no, don't do these things, because they remind us of the racial issues that we don't want to go back to. That's why we raised all those concerns through Jerry Kula about our treatment, the treatment of Africans. We are not second-class members of the denomination. We've got rights that we are supposed to treat each other as equals. Despite our different economic backgrounds, we are supposed to treat each other equal. So the moment we see those signs coming, we can't help but get reminded of the racist kind of signs. So we are saying here, as WCA, yes, that's our aim. We are talking about fairness and justice. We have highlighted all the areas that we believe we have mistreated Africans. We have done that. We have even quoted, senior leaders of the church, bishops and other leaders who have really, denigrated us and belittled us and, told us we needed to grow up. We have highlighted those things because we don't want them to be repeated. We want people to come down and treat each other fairly. This is what we've been trying to do as WCA. That's why we are saying fair for some, fair for all. This is what we are advocating for. So we are saying we are ready to forgive and overlook all those other comments. If we can come down and treat each other seriously and be more mature and have a more dignified general conference that allows everyone to participate and respect other people's, what they desire, and at least bring the justification and make things right at this general conference, because things are not right as we speak. We need to make them right. And this is our best opportunity to do that. So this is what I stand for in terms of WCA in Africa. We really want to bring things down, but yes, we are faced with those racial remarks, racist remarks. We face them every day. But we try to calm down and, make a plea that let us be more mature. Let us show grace. Let's be more gracious to one another and avoid repeating 2019, because we just walk away angry and even more with more animosity towards each other, and it doesn't solve anything. So that's WCA in Africa for you.
Let me sum that up and then have Lonnie help as an interlocutor, because Lonnie shares a lot of similar values with me. Well, and I shouldn't act. I mean, Odell sees things very different than me in some ways. We have some overlap. Same with you and me, Simon. I really operate on the same bandwidth as Lonnie, probably out of everybody, but he and I still have differences. But the question that I just proposed to Simon was, how are we supposed to have a lower temperature, rational conversation whenever one party is calling the other party racist? In American public discourse, as soon as you call someone a racist, I mean, the conversation is over. Simon's answer, to my understanding, is, what are we supposed to do when it's clearly motivated by racism? It's not even an honest conversation if we can't name the dynamics at play. And so is the WCA wrong to raise racial concerns, or is mainstream UMC wrong for even taking that consideration, for refusing to take that consideration seriously and crying foul when called racist? What's the way that people looking at this from the outside should feel? Has a WCA broken a rule of conduct in seeking a mature conversation, or Has the fault been on the other side, or is there some very dissatisfying middle ground that we're supposed to find? What's the wisdom, Lonnie?
Oh, I think there is never an inappropriate time to call for mature conversation. But quite frankly, addressing the substance of this issue isn't really my forte. I'd rather hear from Odell on this, quite frankly.
Well, I was going to pitch it to Odell at the very close of this. I wanted to end on Odell's reflections of how it is that an American audience should be reflecting on this. You know, I would wish that Africans would watch this to understand, but my African audience is not big. It's mostly Americans that are watching this particular thing, and the dynamic that I think we're dealing with is the vast majority of United Methodists that are listening to this stuff have been listening to network news, and I think they've been trained to hear things in a certain way. That I've got my party, my tribe, and we're always right, and their party, their tribe is always wrong, and that's a concern that I have, in particular with mainstream UMC and Mark Holland. It seems to me that they very much operate utilizing that mindset, such that our detractors are all evil. Any concerns that they bring up are all stupid and disingenuous, and it's misinformation. Don't listen to them. Do the 3 R's. Everything's going to be okay. And that sounds very wrong-headed to me.
Well, it
and
is.
Lonnie, you're not a right-leaning person. You're not
No.
a person of the right like me.
Well,
But you seem
on
to be a
some
very
issues-
sane person.
on some
So go
issues-
ahead.
On some issues, I actually am right-leaning, and I have to confess that. The other thing that I have to confess in the context of this conversation is that as a white man who grew up in the Deep South in the 40s and 50s, I am and forever will be a recovering racist. Now I have to acknowledge that. And so when we talk about racism and its effects, then I have to say that there's a bias that is always going to be with me, and that I probably will never get past. And so I have to defer to people who actually can see that for what it is and respond in a different way from which I would be able to respond.
Well, Odell, we need to defer to you in your closing thoughts and reflections on the topics that we've covered for today. And of course, we'll be back at it next week, so you don't have to say all the things. That pressure is not on you. But we've already been told Simon's got a piece he's publishing for us to look out for. You also have shown your hand on how it is you're processing these things by the title of your article. But for those who were, especially in America, UMC, just trying to make sense of all this, what reflections would you offer them for just digesting what we talked about today and interpreting the news that is offered by UM News and other supposed dispassionate sources? What do you think is helpful to highlight?
There's a couple of things. First, I find the states' rights argument being made by liberals in the United Methodist Church to be very hypocritical. We're going to now
let me explain that real quickly to our people who don't know history. What came before the Civil War was Confederate states arguing, hey, the question of slavery should really be determined state to state. Let's live and let live. And you're comparing that to Mark Holland saying, hey, the disaffiliation thing, let's leave that conference to conference with different, make them responsible for it. You're highlighting that they are operating under the same mentality and framework as the Confederacy that was really just trying to maintain slavery. All right, good point. Keep going.
I also am. I'm flabbergasted. I can't help but notice, going back to regionalization, that the reason why I'm still stuck on, we're going to replace central conferences with regional conferences. But in America, we're not going to replace jurisdictional conferences with regional conferences.
Yeah.
We're going to hold another general conference in 2026 to address whether we want to maintain general conferences or jurisdictional conferences. I'm still stuck on that point. And the reason I guess I'm stuck on that point is because Northerners have benefited from the jurisdictional system. Although it was developed in 1939 because Southerners did not want Yankees appointing a Black bishop, Northerners have also benefited from the jurisdictional system because, let's be honest, the first Black bishop wasn't elected until 1984. if my history is correct, then that was Leontine T.C. Kelly in Illinois. So if my history is correct, from 1939 to 1984, there was no Black bishop in the North. And so part of the reason I hear the reticence of getting rid of the jurisdictional system is because Northerners have benefited from it. And so what seems like an easy swap, so we're going to change the central conferences, the regional conference changes the jurisdictional conferences to regional conferences. The reason that's not happening is because Northerners don't want it to happen. And because the other side of the coin is white supremacy, is Northern liberalism. That's just, we talk about white liberal racism in African American studies. And I have to be honest with you. If we get a significant number of African delegates not coming to this general conference, I just don't see, we need to postpone regionalization to the 2026 special session of the general conference. We don't need to deal with regionalization here. There's questions I have about the revised social principles. I don't know. Lonnie has stated this is what he believes the agenda should be. If we take up the revised social principles without, my understanding is Adam Hamilton has said that we need to strike the man and woman or two persons out of the revised social principles because he doesn't think that that's going to pass. But this video that I saw at the WCA, I'm interested in hearing what more Black people who have watched the video think of it. What I've heard in the comments to that video were a lot of white folks, based upon the pictures that were on their names in the comment sections, that, you know, when you type in your name, a picture shows up. I saw very few Black people comment on that. And it was very negative towards the WCA. And I got it, but if you don't see how this the system of regionalization isn't racist, then we need to sit down and have an honest conversation about racism in the North. And I need to break that down to you, but that's all I'm gonna say.
Well, I remember Mark Tooley published a book several years ago showing how the Northern Church, the MEC, was actually more racist than the MEC South in many ways for decades after the split. And oh boy, did they get so mad at him for highlighting all these anecdotal things. So I wish I could recall the title of the book. I made it about halfway through. Yeah, do it.
Let me just, I have another article forthcoming, and it has nothing to do with the United Methodist Church or anything that's going on. It is called Slavery in the North. And so when I'm talking about this, I'm not just pulling this out of a Black conservative reaction or Black moderate reaction to what's going on in the United Methodist Church. I'm actually dealing with historical facts that Harvard University and Yale University and Princeton University have owned up to since the pandemic began. And so some of this is also in the United Methodist history in the North. That's another forthcoming article, but
well, just make sure to send me links to that stuff, and I'm going to do my part to promote it. Simon, with you as well, and then Lonnie, I would tell you any articles you publish, send it my way, but you just publish directly on Facebook, and that gets plenty of attention on its own. So anyway, all three of you guys, wonderful analysis today. Thank you so much for that. Friends, for joining us. If we've tapped into something else that you want to hear about, we've already talked about the revised social principles and why that might be a problem. We've done several episodes on regionalization and why that might be a problem. We also had Lloyd Nirota on the program and directly asked him many of these questions with our concerns on here. He was one of the original authors of the Christmas Covenant. If this is the first episode you watched and you found this interesting, just know we've built a good foundation for you to draw on. So consider going back through our catalog and watching some of those episodes because it's all still relevant. I'm going to give an invitation if Mark Holland or anyone else representing mainstream UMC or the larger structure of the United Methodist Church, if you think we're doing a bad job representing this stuff and that we're missing out on something, we would love to have you on the show with us next week or the week afterwards so that you can set the record straight. We're not trying to paint a portrait. We're just trying to understand the truth here. So get in touch with us through the email address, plainspokenpod@gmail.com. We're going to be back at this next week. We might have Amy with us. We might have Joe with us. We'll see who's with us. But like I said at the head of this, if you have a question you want us to deal with, get it to us beforehand so we can work it in. And then make sure to be spreading this among different United Methodists who want to know what's going on. I only did this because I saw that there was a need that was not being met. And I know Tim Tanton of UM News just sent out a thing saying, hey, we do great work, and why don't you send us some more money so that we can do work for General Conference? I'll tell you something. Even if you send me no money, I'm going to be doing live coverage of the General Conference. I'm going to be finding people there to come report before and after plenary session. I'm going to be doing my best during General Conference to spread accurate information, make sure everybody sees what's going on. But if you do want to support me in doing that work, you can go to plainspoken.locals.com. That's where you can support this ministry. And I'm going to do the same thing for the GMC. And long term, I'm hoping to cover live gatherings of lots of different denominations because I think people have been excluded from the conversations for too long. We need to have an informed, educated populace. And I think this has been really worthy. Lonnie, Simon, Odell, you wouldn't be a part of this now if you didn't think it was worthy either. So thank you so much for pouring yourself into your United Methodist Church, and may God see fit to bless your efforts with much fruitfulness. All right, friends, we're going to say goodbye now. God bless you. We'll see you next week.